A massive thank you to the patrons for supporting me and my work. That's right, we're back. Perspective is important. In Historia's first chapter, we saw the events unfold through our main character Doug's eyes, but learned that perhaps his take on everything wasn't the most, we'll say, grounded in reality. He was clearly depressed, anxious, and dealing with a purposeless wanderlust that found him inside a burning building alongside what basically amounted to a stranger. Yes, a stranger named Michelle, a girl, Doug's junior, that had somehow turned the perfect role model student into an arsonist and accessory to murder, all to track down and destroy the seemingly invincible and everlasting serpent deity. But what about Michelle's side of things? What led her to the same burning building, the same burning desire to have her questions answered about the serpent and what it took from her? Well, Hello everyone, it's me, Sassy, back at it again with another video. Chapter 2 of Historia has been out for a while now, and I've been hard at work on this video. If you're unaware of what Historia is, please give my video on Chapter 1 a watch, or go play it yourself. Both chapters are available in the current build of the Historia visual novel, and can be found on itch.io, or by following the link in the description. Yada yada yada, like, comment, subscribe, check out the game in the description if you want to play it. Seriously, this is worth the first time experience on your own. Don't let this nobody on the internet take that away from you. I'll be honest, this video has been one hell of a mother to write. I've gone through like 7 different scripts, a dozen different meltdowns, and a few coming to Jesus moments before realizing that in order to get this video out and move on with my life, I'm just gonna have to write down my thoughts and shoot my shot. Historia's second chapter is a labyrinth. It is a maze. It's like trying to pick a lock with a banana at the threat of gunpoint. It's just absolute madness to comprehend. I'll say it again. Perspective is important. Perception has a large role in that, and being able to decipher what is real and what is not is one of the keys to understanding the events of Historia. This video will not be structured in the way that my chapter 1 video was, because this story wraps around that chapter in a very expansive way. There's a genuine metric ton of things to cover, so I apologize not only for this video's length, but for the long hiatus in between uploads. This video has been a monster in the making. You will leave this chapter with a mountains more questions than answers, although I'm assuming that that's intentional. Damn you, Team Lucid! Let's take it one step at a time. Returning to the night Max was taken by the serpent, we find Michelle out on one of her nightly patrols. She happens by a classmate named Patrick, who recognizes her and attempts to strike up a conversation, but as we know, Michelle isn't exactly the chatty type. As we'll see later on, Patrick is also not really one to pick up on social cues, so Michelle leaves him high and dry to continue on her route. It's when she notices the signature smell of ozone does she realize that tonight is the night that she's been waiting for years. Just as we witnessed in chapter 1, Michelle watches as Doug leaps onto the surface of the serpent, only to fall unconscious to the mercy of fate. It is Michelle that bears the mantle of fate tonight, and she chooses to save Doug at the risk of her own life. Only, the serpent seems to spare them both, eyeing Michelle oddly before leaping off into the night. Michelle is left to witness Max's house restructure itself as the occupants now lay within the belly of the beast. Doug, in a dazed stupor, is led home by Michelle, and as she lay him in his quarters, he calmly thanks her. "Thank you for saving me. I'll never forget that." But as we know, Doug does forget, and this is just one crack in the foundation that ends up costing the town of Penrith everything. Now here's where things are gonna get a little crazy. So in order to keep track of everything and make sure that there wasn't any funny business, I literally had 2 instances of Historia going at the same time. One playing through chapter 1 and the other playing through chapter 2. Now there aren't many replayed events that play word for word, save for specific times that Doug and Michelle interact. And as we know, the history function of Historia loves to hide secrets and other sensitive information away from private prying eyes, like how the rainbow serpent seems to be unable to be quantified properly, or how Michelle wants Doug to do things to her that you wouldn't really expect given how she appears from Doug's perspective. But I went back to the diner scene because I remember that was where Max was heard the most trying to reach out to Doug, and yeah. There's a lot to unpack just here. First off, a considerable amount of dialogue shared between Doug and Michelle is ever so slightly changed. Whether it's the use of the word accident or just Doug wondering if Michelle was hurt, that's not the issue. It's why these differences exist in the first place. Although this could easily be explained as the devs not really caring about exact dialogue and instead keeping with the same conversation beats, I don't believe that it's so easily waved away in that regard. The writers at Team Lucid are really good at their job, not to mention that the two different routes are in the same build of the game, so why not just copy-paste the dialogue? What is the purpose of making such minor changes and letting me know that there's been a slight change in history? It's easier than ever in this current build to know that something is up, given how the text changes to italic and then back again on occasion. This has to be intentional. Additionally, Max seems to chime in at the same time that Michelle has some inner monologue. Or maybe it's not even an inner monologue. In the same way that it was clear that Doug actually mouthed off to his family instead of keeping the peace, I think Doug was actually aware that he lost his memory of Michelle after the initial serpent attack. I'm not going to go through every piece of interaction here, but there's some very telling quotes that allude to something confusingly bigger at play. I think, and hear me out here, that there's a second or even third conversation happening right here. Max is clearly still around. He even chimes in with this little nugget when Michelle mentions the universal obliteration effect you're subjected to from being devoured by the serpent. I think Max is here right now. I think whatever happened to Max is not as simple as him being eaten by a deity and erased from existence. There is a voice in Michelle's history that sounds an awful lot like Max, as if he's listening into the conversation and trying to aid these two however he can. If this person is also this person, there's more at play here than meets the giant spooky death glare eye of the dumb stupid serpent. I hate you, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you. I used to be happy! So how about that whole dam incident, the one that took the life of Doug's sister Natalia? Well, it's a bit muddied in details, but let me give you the best summation of events prior that I can. Similar to Doug's own home life, Michelle's is tumultuous and unsympathetic. Her most common interaction is with her pseudo-mother figure slash babysitter Zoe, a youthful, flirtatious girl whose major contribution to Michelle's state of mind is just the fact that she's around. She teaches her how to be a generic human being, which ends up planting the thought in Michelle's head that in order to get what she wants, she'll have to be a crafty huntress who makes alliances and enemies as she conquers the world around her. Michelle's parents are often not home and clearly do not have the time or patience to deal with her daughter's delinquent behavior, so their remedy is to simply hand her off to someone else any chance that they can get. One of those people is her therapist, Layla. Although most of their interactions have clearly not borne much fruit, it's clear that when Doug is introduced to Michelle's merry band of apathetic, adulterous assholes, there's a spark of hope in creating a legitimate relationship with a human being not obligated by familial relations or job requirements. Both Zoe and Layla push Michelle to reach out to her classmates, not only to better her social skills, but also to present herself as a human being with, cleanliness standards? It just so happens that Natalia is in Michelle's class, so the stars align, and after an embarrassing level of shame being directed at my boy Patrick for being a white knight, a date is set for Michelle to tag along with Natalia and her friends to the mall. A character that I did not touch on in my first video is Michelle's friend, Yume, a homeless man who's apparently an elder, whatever that means. Michelle brings Doug to visit Yume to learn of the Rainbow Serpent and to verify some information, but Yume basically shoots down the notion that the serpent could even be defeated, instead advising Michelle to instead take the route of caution. Again, here the dialogue between both routes differs ever so slightly, including some dialogue replacement during a particularly heated part of the discussion where either Yume or someone else is quite adamant that Michelle end her warpath and simply move on. Here's a gif of a dancing hot dog. Boom! Now we're at the mall. I bet you're wondering how that mall trip went, huh? Not well. Not well at all. No, turns out Natalia is a tad overprotective of her brother. We saw a bit of this in chapter 1, as there's a few scenes of Natalia bringing a bit of tough love to her brother to try and keep him on the straight and narrow. But with Doug not present, and the seemingly only thing currently messing with his future directly in front of her eyes, Natalia moves in like a goose protecting its eggs, quickly finding an opening when the two are alone to ask about whether she's been spending alone time with Doug or not. Although initially there isn't anything that Natalia can pin down as outwardly repulsive in regards to Michelle's behavior, a set of earrings in Michelle's hand catches her eye. These were an apology gift from her babysitter Zoe a little while back as reparations for a fight that they had had, but Natalia recognizes them from a store and accuses Michelle of having shoplifted them, ending the mall date on a sour note as neither side is willing to relent as to where the earrings came from. And just like that, the events are locked in place. Doug and Michelle continue looking for the serpent, Natalia continues to get antsy about the relationship, and it coalesces to a full-on assault atop the dam, where Natalia is the aggressor. Not akin to letting her brother waste his time on what she deems to be nothing more than a delinquent, Natalia places her entire reputation on the line in one final emotional stand, only for Michelle to shove her away in self-defense. And just like that, one of the most traumatic events in Doug's life takes place. And while Doug and his family lay broken on the floor, Michelle revels in her achievement. This is where the biggest and most dramatic shift in tone is present in the story, and it leads me to believe that, quite honestly, everything past this point is pure fantasy. Not fantasy as in we're reading a fantasy novel about depressed people and Australian water deities. Fantasy as in none of what follows is even real, because what I'm about to describe to you is some of the most insane and unbelievable shit I have ever heard. Remember that ending in chapter 1 where Michelle blew up the dam to save the town of Penrith from the serpent's reality-destructive stomach? Try this on for size. After the final serpent encounter where Doug attempts to have Michelle devoured and reality rewritten in an attempt to save his deceased sister, Michelle is offered a partnership by the Rainbow Serpent itself. Unable to truly obtain what it wants from its tirade across Penrith, it recruits young Michelle and the duo assault the dam. Although Michelle is simply a youth with all the inadequacies that entails, with the ability to command the serpent and recover from fatal wounds by devouring and deleting those responsible, Michelle goes about the dam setting her explosives. It's as she's preparing to detonate the charges and bring the whole dam down, Coca-Cola included, that Patrick arrives in one final desperate attempt to appeal to Michelle. Things go horribly bad as Michelle, now unwilling to draw on her own humanity any longer, fatally wounds Patrick and blows the whole structure to hell. When the dust finally settles and Michelle comes to her senses, she finds herself in some forest clearing, in one piece, and away from the now annihilated town of Penrith. Coca-Cola included. So what's to be made of this? Why has this video taken so long to make? Well, let's go through the highlights and maybe expand on a few. First off, Zoe. Yes, Michelle's babysitter and probably closest friend. There's a very real possibility that she doesn't exist. Right before Michelle heads to the final confrontation with Doug, there's a scene where Zoe comforts her with some deliciously fluffy pancakes. Zoe mentions that her and her friends who usually explore abandoned buildings for Instagram likes are instead going to explore an out-of-the-way cave. That night, as Michelle rests and prepares for her meeting with Doug, all evidence that Zoe had ever existed is wiped from the face of the earth and being replaced by a much more snooty and unlikable character named Evelyn, who is of course fucking Michelle's mom. Now, two things. Firstly, Zoe's erasure is permanent. Not permanent in a story sense, although this is of course the case, but if you start a brand new game and proceed through the story, every scene that would include Zoe is instead replaced with Evelyn. What makes this especially concerning is that the earrings that Natalia chides Michelle for having are still there. But if reality was rewritten, wouldn't the earrings have disappeared if it was Zoe that gave them to Michelle? Michelle still ends up having them, only this time it's obvious from her internal monologue that she actually did steal them. Furthermore, let's talk about Yume. This man is an absolute enigma to me, mainly due to the stark contrast he has in relation to what the story seems to be implying. Whereas a lot of what occurs could be explained as the shared fantasy between two deeply disturbed youths, Yume seems to bring a layer of mysticism and fantasy unseen anywhere else in the story. He's described as an elder, and that's a capital E, folks. And while I'm not too privy to Australian culture, using good old Wikipedia shows us that an Australian Aboriginal elder is defined as someone who has gained recognition as a custodian of knowledge and lore, and who has permission to disclose knowledge and beliefs. So these elders are archivists of sorts and would know a great deal about myths, superstitions, and legends. Whether they're real or not is still up for grabs, considering the varying levels of interpretation one usually has to bring to Historia's dialogue. But one blatant standout hits you right in the face, and the implications are absolutely horrifying. Layla, Michelle's therapist for those of you who weren't paying attention, in a bid to shake up their usual session, offers to use hypnosis on Michelle to try and lull out any repressed memories. While not as invasive as initially thought, given that Michelle has the power to stop the process at any time, it's clear as they proceed that something huge is buried deep in the recesses of Michelle's mind. As they delve deeper and deeper, it's Yume who appears within Michelle's subconscious, stating that there's absolutely no good in proceeding. Yet Michelle and Layla continue digging. What do they find? Oh, just the repressed memory of Michelle being sexually assaulted by an unknown man that Yume ends up murdering to save Michelle. Oh, and they also had to dispose of the dead body together. Why this memory is repressed is where things get even muddier. Yume explains that he did not want Michelle growing up shackled with the memories of that night, so he wiped her mind clean and replaced them with the fantasy of the serpent, meaning that everything that Michelle interpreted as the machinations of the serpent was simply her coping with the events that happened that fateful night. Timeline-wise, this is a bit of an odd event, given that Michelle is out late at night, which she would be doing if she was on one of her nightly patrols looking for the serpent, but maybe things aren't that black and white. I'm not certain what Michelle's life was like before the first serpent attack, so perhaps she was out for a walk or heading back from a friend's house when she was assaulted. Also, doesn't this guy look familiar? Is this not Max? Same hair flip, same general build, same chin? But if this is Max, that means Max is dead, which can't possibly be given the case, given that his death in Chapter 1 is what caused Doug to ally himself initially with Michelle. Did these events really happen, or is this yet another trick of the deity? Additionally, the story of Chapter 2 ends with Michelle in a drastically different place than she was in Chapter 1. And if you think that these two events could be bridged together, I have some bad news. During the conversation between Michelle and the serpent, where she agrees to ally herself with it, she casts her undershirt aside, meaning that unless someone had a spare white button-up, these two events cannot exist in the same timeline. But what does that mean for the overall story? The dam still breaks and Michelle still ends up committing the grievous and unforgivable sin of wiping out the population of Penrith. So why the difference? What does the story gain from having slight variations of everything? And what about the serpent? What do we even know about this thing? For starters, it seems to desire the removal of everyone from Penrith. Possibly. Given what it tells Michelle, it wants everyone dead and gone, but can we trust that this conversation even happened? Also, if the serpent has been trying to kill people and remove them from Penrith, it's done a really terrible job of it, given that whoever it eats is automatically replaced through reality rewriting. There's no way this thing is that stupid, which is why I believe that none of what we see in the dam scene is even real. Patrick even mentions that he checked around the dam and didn't notice anything amiss besides Michelle setting up her little bombs, which can I just say is absolutely insane? This little girl made enough explosives in her parents' garage to take down a government-built and owned water reservoir dam? Additionally, Natalia's death seems way too easy. If you imagine that Natalia was thrust over the railing, perhaps it makes sense, but Natalia was pushed through a concrete barrier and metal rail. Sure, the thing was cracked, but two teenage girls fighting were able to break through it just from the weight of Natalia's body? That seems far-fetched, unless the serpent was there and made it happen. All in all, there's simply too many questions to properly answer as to whether the events of Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 fit in a definitive way. If I had to hazard a guess, I would say that the serpent probably actually is real, but its motives are way, way different than what we think they are. I don't think Max is dead, but I do think Zoe never existed. If the serpent is completely not real, then Doug is a drug addict and Michelle is a psychopath with trauma she cannot comprehend. The two of them entangled in a shared delusional disorder. I'm sure we'll get a ton of clarity in Chapter 3, which I'm eagerly awaiting the release of, but who's gonna be the main character? If Doug is dead and Michelle is all that's left, then it's impossible to continue going given the events that have unfolded, unless we're gonna head back in time for a third person's perspective about the whole thing. But what character fits that bill? Whose perspective would elucidate an insane number of questions about what's real and what's not? Probably Max. Like I said, I don't think he's actually dead. There's a possibility that the serpent is using multiple timelines and shuffling people around between them to create a single unified and ideal series of events that suit its desires, all the while shrouding itself in mystery by muddling with the memories of a few disturbed Australian teenagers? What do I know? I just like video games. Now leave me alone, you slimy fuck. Taking up more than enough of my time. That's the mystery of Chapter 2, y'all. Very sorry for taking so long to make this video. I'm gonna look here and I'm gonna read the rest of my script. If you want to play the game for yourself, it's in the description below, like I've said before. If you want my generic 5-second review of the whole thing, it's definitely the best current build of Historia. Both chapters are in one single package. The history changing effect is now as easy as ever to spot. And the music, oh, the music. ML Beck once again knocked it out of the park with everything. Different songs and tracks slowly fade in and out with perfect timing. The entire soundtrack fits with the mood of the story perfectly. The writing of the chapter is notably well spoken, though I fear this chapter has the unfortunate nature of being a wraparound story, so the pacing is wonky in places, and there's some moments that had me scratching my head at their inclusion. The soda moment in particular is by far the most eye-rolling, but given how preposterous the cave to dam explosion sequence is, there's a lot riding on Chapter 3 to iron out a great many details. Seriously, if you want me to believe that a centuries-old deity is stupid enough to need a troubled 14-year-old's help to kill people rather than simply not swallowing when it's chomping on someone, you're in for a rude awakening.
What'll follow now is a few clips from a Q&A session that my good friend Maddie D did with the Historia devs. This isn't every question asked, just the ones I felt pertinent to the discussion at hand. Enjoy! Chapter 3 will be the final chapter. When will we see it?
I'm about halfway through. That's probably being generous, maybe about 40% of the way through the current Chapter 3 script. But of course, post-script, there's like quite a long time between actually putting in all the tricks and stuff to make it actually work, so there will be some time.
There are a lot of hidden gems. Are you worried that many may never be found?
No. So the big reveal, and of course, spoiler alert, I'm sure you've already done the flash ups there. In Chapter 1, there are two histories. So in all of the key scenes, the history that you read, what you read on screen and what you read in the history are two different things. And in some cases, they're wildly different. And there's a pretty big hint to what's going on in the Chapter 1 history, if you read it, although I have seen a number of different theories that come out of that. With Chapter 2, there are a lot more of those kind of hints that have been dropped in. And with the Chapter 1 playtesting, the history thing for me, I thought no one would get it. I thought that it'd be months before anyone even noticed, and then someone would think it was a problem. But almost every single playtester came to me and said, you've got a bug with the history. It doesn't work right. And it's like, guys, do you think that maybe that was on purpose? There are things in Chapter 2 that have gone through all of the playtesters, all of the early testers, some of the Patreons as well. As far as I can tell, no one's picked up on it, as far as I can tell. There's one person who mentioned something that made me think, oh, maybe they're onto something, but yeah, they didn't follow through with it. So either it's their own theory and they're keeping quiet, or they noticed it and thought everyone else noticed it. But yeah, I would love it to find, like 5 years down the track, that someone finally finds one of these things we've dropped in there and says, oh shit, that happened, because that would just be super cool.
I mean, that's part of the fun of making these things, is putting in Easter eggs. Regardless of whether or not they're found, the effort of putting them in there and making sure they work is still kind of fun. I personally like the fact that there's random stuff that people even in Chapter 1 haven't fully found out yet. Or maybe they have, they don't know. But it's kind of fun lodging those things in there and then watching people find them.
Yeah, there's still stuff in Chapter 2 that people haven't found. Whether they've found it by the time you put this together, I don't know. But I'm going to guess no, because I guess the sharpest eyes are the first ones to look at it. And none of you guys have found it, so...
When writing the serpent, do you consider it evil, or just the antagonist?
That's a tough one. I'm trying to think whether it's a spoiler or not. I don't think that it is. I think that it is driven by its own rules, and trying to then sort of say, the human rules apply to that may not be the right way to do it. I'm not quite sure. It's not malicious. Or maybe it is. That's a tough question. So I guess if I look at how I'm writing it, the way I write it is more about something that's reacting to stimulus rather than sort of like a sentient being that is doing this to go out of its way to really be a pain in the ass.
Did you come up with the entire plan for all 3 chapters, or did you go chapter to chapter? Or has a lot changed from concept to production?
As far as 3 chapters goes, that was originally Cam's plan. He and Not Important kind of sat down and got a lot of that kind of rolled out and done.
I would be lying, though, if I didn't say that changed. One of the interesting things, doing one of these projects where you've got multiple people, you'll discuss things at length, you'll plan things out, you'll assume that your vision of what, you've explained everything to the nth degree and you believe that. But then when you read someone else's interpretation of it, you go, crap, actually, yeah, we never really discussed how this mechanic works, or why that person did that, or is a side character going to come in or come out. It was planned, but the core message I don't think has changed. The way that the first 3 chapters have changed, their plot has always stayed as we wanted it, but there have been sort of variations from that, especially around things like side characters, mechanics, in terms of what actually happens. I guess we're in spoiler town here. So one thing that I never thought of: how do the new people come into the old house? So after Max gets gobbled, how does that old lady end up in his house? And I just always thought, well, it's a new kind of like timeline thing. So it's like she's just appeared out of nowhere, and her entire history kind of started at that point. Whereas if you read chapter 2, you'll notice that that's not how it happens. It's almost like someone gets shifted from the real world, like someone who's existing in the real world gets shifted into that house, and that's how it kind of moves across there. So I mean, I like that. It's actually a better explanation than my original, just kind of and then magic and now a new person's in your house.
The dude who attacks Michelle and gets clobbered by William kinda looks like Max.
I'm gonna say no comment on that. If she ever answers, then that's an NI question for sure about why the characters look like each other. It could just be the artist version of writer's block, whatever that's called. But at least in my mind, there was no deliberate reason for that.
Do you want the story to have definitive answers, or would you like it left up to interpretation?
In the past, I was always a fan of the kind of choose your own adventure ending. If you think maybe Inception, is he in the dream, is he not in the dream? Yeah, who knows, you get to choose, and then you can pick it apart for ages. And it's nice, not just because you get to put your own area in, your own idea in the end, but you also have that motivation to go back and try something again, and talk about the things that are hidden there that people haven't found yet. That's when you pick those things up. I embarrassingly enough watched Fight Club quite a few times. I graduated from high school in the year 2000, so it was all the rage back then, and it was like one of the first DVDs I had, so it was just on repeat, and a lot of that was just to kind of go back and find all those little bits and pieces, and then jump on online forums and then say, hey, did you notice that this on frame 25 of this shot? But I've also seen a lot of people that don't pull it off. I think it really takes a lot of effort to kind of pull off that question mark ending without everyone going, but why? I honestly can't think of an example of a poor one right now, but I know there was something I read not too long ago. Hyperion is an example. Now I'm sure that a lot of people are going to go out there and say, Hyperion's a great series and everything else, but if you just read that first book, the ending is kind of weak. You spent 4,000 pages setting up this universe and characters and strikes and all sorts of shit, and then they go, we're almost about to arrive. Punkt. The fuck is that? You need to have an ending that kind of is an ending, I think. That's a long way around saying we have always had, let's call it a rationale. There's always been a in-universe reason for everything, and yeah, I guess that's probably as much as I can say, because I don't want to sort of lead anyone down a path or confirm or deny any fan theories.
All in all, glad to share my thoughts on this piece, as scattered as they are. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you in Chapter 3. Later!